Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you good, yeah.
Prof.
Very clear.
Prof. Very clear.
I apologize for the delay. I couldn't get into the room because it was full. So we had to, I guess somebody had to get out of the room so that I could get into the room. So, but I'm here. So alhamdulillah. All right. Okay, so let's get right to it. This is an intellectual discourse session sponsored by our faculty, Deputy Dean's Office. And so I will be talking today for about an hour. We only have about an hour, short talk. In the US, we call these lunchtime talks or maybe brown bag sessions or something, especially for students. So my topic today is going to be on problem statements, research problem statements, writing good problem statements. And since we don't have a lot of time, I'm not gonna kill you with a lot of theory and all that. I'm gonna try and show you a lot of examples and hopefully break down somewhat what comprises a good problem statement in research. Okay, and I want to actually take you through the sort of hopefully try to take you through the thought process as well of writing a good problem statement. So when it comes to writing problem statements, let me just share my screen here. So I have to let me first apologize. My slides are a little bit old school. They're not that entertaining. So the title is called of the talk is When the Problem is the Problem, Developing a Good Research Problem Statement. And the reason it's a play on words, obviously, when the problem is the problem, because oftentimes in writing up good research, proposing good research, and even at the level of Viva for students, for example, problem statements maintain their role as the biggest stumbling block, for doing good research. Okay, if you don't have a good problem statement for your study, it's really hard to execute a good research study. Very hard. Okay, because the problem is really the basis for the study. It's why you're doing the study, right? And it is also an argument. Okay, we have to understand that a problem statement is an argument. You have to make an argument for why your research should be carried out. And that is really what a problem statement is. If you think of it in those terms, you think that you need to convince your reader, you need to convince your examiner or your assessor, or whoever, that this study is worth doing, then you're sort of in the right frame of mind to write a good problem statement, okay? So in any thesis, and I'm gonna really talk from the perspective of a PhD thesis more than anything, just because this is a talk really for students. And then of course, I think the majority of the students here are probably PhD students, although Masters of Science students can also benefit, I think, from this. But if we look at our chapter 1, we start off with our introduction and background of the study, okay? And that leads us to our problem statement. Now, a lot of students confuse the introduction of their study with the problem statement. One of the most common mistakes we see in student writing is a lack of clear delineation between the introduction or the background of the study and the problem statement, okay? So sometimes we get very short introductions, like a page or two, and then these 10-page problem statements. Actually, it's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be more the other way around, where you provide a really good, thorough background of the study, and the problem statement is really concise, okay? It is a concise essay that really focuses in on the specific problem that your study is going to deal with or attempt to deal with, okay? And of course, from the problem come out the research questions and the study objectives, and then the rest of the chapter 1, okay? So it's really important that we're able to differentiate and position our problem statement within the chapter 1 in the right way, okay? So what is the big deal about problem statements? What's the big deal? Why is it such a problem to write a good problem statement, okay? Well, The most frequent deficiency noted by thesis evaluators is lack of a clear problem statement, okay? And as I just mentioned, in almost every thesis that we review, at least speaking from my own experience, there are always issues with the problem statement. It's very hard, very challenging for students to write good problem statements. The most frequent dilemma among graduate students is their seemingly aimless search for a problem significant enough to pursue and discrete enough to handle. Okay, so when you write a good problem statement, you have to balance significance with discretion. In other words, the problem has to be enough of a problem. In other words, you have to make the case that this research problem that you're studying really is a problem. Okay, and oftentimes students don't exactly explain how this problem that they have come up with, how is it a problem? Who is it a problem for? In what way is it a problem? Okay, is it resulting in the government losing money? Is it resulting in negative health outcomes? Is it resulting in students dropping out from school? What is the significance of the problem that you're trying to study? Okay, and then the second one, discrete enough to handle. In other words, is the problem specific enough? Is it feasible? Okay, and is it well defined clearly so that it can be properly studied? Okay, if the problem is too big and if you haven't chiseled down the problem to something that's really researchable, given the constraints of doing for example, a PhD, that's going to be in itself a problem. Okay, so you have to balance the significance of the problem, right? Really explaining how it's a problem and for who it's a problem, as well as making it discrete enough that it can be studied, all right? Because if it's too big for one person to handle, it's going to cause bigger problems down the line. So more often than not, problem statements, or what students claim they're writing as problem statements, end up looking like solutions in search of a problem, rather than a problem itself. Okay, so we say, I often find myself writing in my review, what is the problem here? Okay, often our students will offer many solutions before they even identify what the problem is. Okay, now that may be because you already have in your mind what you think is the solution to the problem, right? Or you've chosen to do a study because, I know this is what's going on, and I know that this is what needs to be done. All right, but I'm just going to study it just to sort of formalize it and get it down, Like I know why people aren't following SOP protocols in COVID-19. They're lazy, right? Okay, so we make those kind of assumptions, right? And by doing that, of course, we really do ourselves an injustice because we sort of we miss the opportunity to really put together a good problem statement, okay? And then, of course, but from that point on, the research is going to be essentially flawed. So a well-articulated statement of the problem establishes the foundation for everything in your study to follow, all right? Everything. So once again, if you're not clear about the problem that you're studying, okay, you haven't defined it well enough, you haven't made it discrete enough, you haven't clearly indicated what the significance of the problem is. If those things are not all clear in your mind and you haven't written them in such a way, the rest of the study most likely is going to have some issues, all right? And it's going to be harder for you later on, okay? So this is some of the issue related to problem statements, okay? And the last one is, the problem statement, think of the problem statement as the heart of your study, all right? While your research questions or objectives, depending on what type of study you're doing, are what guide you in conducting and carrying out the study, all right? But the heart of what your study is all about is really this thing called the problem statement, okay? So you need to really write a good one and be clear about it. So the academic sort of definition of a research problem, okay? And the reason I say research problem is because you have to be very clear that you're not, in your research proposal or in your study, you're not presenting or you're not confusing a research problem with a social problem, okay? So of course, oftentimes we want our research to address problems in the real world, okay? Usually that's why we do research, especially as social scientists, right? We see a problem, we see something going on at home, in the organization, in the community, in the school, and we want to study it because it's a problem and we want to address it with our research, okay? Now, that's all fine and good, and that's important. However, when you frame that social problem out there in the real world as a research study problem, you have to frame it as a problem of knowledge. Okay, so you can see here from the definition by Bryman, a research problem is a definite or clear expression about an area of concern, a condition to be improved upon, a difficulty to be eliminated, or a troubling question that exists in scholarly literature, in theory or within existing practice, that points to a need for meaningful understanding and deliberate investigation. A research problem does not state how to do something, offer a vague or broad proposition, or present a value question. In other words, it's not a solution. It is a problem, a query, a dilemma that you want to present and address through a study, okay, through a study. Okay, so a research problem. A research problem, as I just mentioned, is a problem of knowledge. It's a problem because we don't know something. There's some knowledge that we lack that we need to know in order to address whatever that social or felt problem is out there in the real world. So why are students skipping school? You know, why is truancy so high in a certain school? Okay, that is an important problem that we need to address, right? Now, we are not able to address it because there's something we don't know. We don't know why these students are skipping school, okay? If we knew why, then we would just develop a program or an intervention, or we would address some policy problem that is, you know, causing students to miss school. But the fact that we feel like we don't really know why they are skipping school indicates that there's something we need to know so that we can address the problem. Therefore, it becomes a research problem, a knowledge problem. There's knowledge that we lack. We need to know this thing so that we can begin to really address that felt problem. Okay, that's what a research problem is. It's a lack of knowledge. It's that we don't know something that we need to know. And that's why we're doing a study, okay, as opposed to an intervention. However, too often problem statements refer to social problems without mentioning the research problem. So it's important to mention the social problem. Of course, you want to address truancy. It's a big problem, okay? But the reason you're doing a study to address truancy is because we don't know something. And we need to know that something so that we can address truancy, okay? So a lot of students might talk about smoking among youth without ever mentioning what we don't know in order to address smoking. Okay, a research problem is not that we need to stop youth from smoking. That's the ultimate problem we want to address in the world, okay, the social problem. The research problem is that we don't know why youth are smoking. We don't know how to stop youth from smoking. We don't know why all of our interventions on smoking are not working. Okay, we don't know why youth from a certain socioeconomic background are smoking and others are not. We don't know why smoking is becoming more popular among girls. We don't know all these things. Therefore, we need to do research to find out. Okay, and that is the real research problem. Okay, it's a problem of knowledge. So you need to frame your research problem statement in such a way. Okay, in such a way. By the way, if you want to stop me at any time to ask questions, please feel free to do so. Okay, we got to move kind of fast, but I will try to answer questions as we go. Okay, so feel free. So, for example, young people smoking is a social problem, as I just mentioned. Okay, so research problems related to youth smoking could be that we don't know why young people smoke, how they become influenced to smoke, or the relationship between smoking and some other variable. All right, so these would be research problems, okay, in order that we undertake in order to address the social problem. Since we lack knowledge relating to the reasons or motivations for young people smoking, it is difficult for us to create programs to help them quit. And this is the whole basis for, empirical-based interventions. Interventions that are based on research findings, empirical data. Okay, and why there's such a push for this now? Because for years we create these programs to address problems, but they don't work. They don't work. Why? Probably because they were not based on sound research, right? And if we are properly diagnosing the problem with strong, rigorous research, then the solution to the problem becomes more evident, right? There's a better chance, a much better chance that we'll be able to at least mitigate the problem. Maybe not eradicate it completely, but at least reduce it, inshallah. All right. Is the problem important? That's another thing we have to address in our problem statement. Why do we need the knowledge? Okay, so the significance of the research. And you need to really think about this. You need to put some time and some thought into this. A lot of students, they just give the same old when it comes to significance of the research. Oh, it's going to help the field. It's going to contribute to new knowledge. You don't say exactly how. You don't say what knowledge, but you say it's going to contribute to knowledge. You say it's going to help the field. It's going to help practitioners. It's going to help policymakers. You need to provide some specifics, okay, on how this is a problem and why would we need this knowledge, okay? So it's going to contribute to the field's knowledge base, but specifically where within the knowledge base are you going to contribute, okay? What new knowledge are you going to provide that's going to advance the field, all right? You need to think about it. You can't just go in, oh, I copied from my friend. They said that it's going to advance theory. I'll just write that. No, you need to really think about how is this knowledge going to advance the field? Now, advancing the field, remember, with every single study that's done, advancing the field is not shaking the field, not turning the field upside down. You're just contributing something new, some new insight that we didn't know before. And that is advancing the field when it comes to knowledge. Knowledge is an incremental kind of thing. How do we advance knowledge is often in very small ways, but important ways, right? One new variable added to a model is enough for a PhD, all right? And that's an important contribution. So don't think that, oh, I'm only, doing a little bit of, this new novel work that I'm doing. It's not, it's so insignificant. No, it's not, it's significant. New knowledge is significant. And then, of course, contribution to practice. How might addressing this problem help people? Okay, so again, translate that into practice. Okay, so the process of identifying a problem, we can identify problems from many places. Okay, first and foremost is the literature. You got to read. You cannot do a good problem statement without really, really knowing the literature. Okay, you can do a problem statement. It won't be a very good one, if you just sort of do a cursory reading of the literature. But if you want to write a really good problem statement, you know the literature, okay? And you have to read a lot. There's no way around this, people, okay? If you're going to do a PhD, especially, before I did my PhD, I didn't wear glasses. After PhD, I now wear glasses because I read so much, killed my eyes. Talk with other people in the area, So some of you may be studying topics related to your workplace. So you know the problem very well, which is great. That's a tremendous support for developing a good problem statement, right? But if you have no direct contact with the field, talk to people in the field, talk to experts in the field, talk to people that are experiencing the problem, right? Get a sense of the context, okay? Don't rely solely on articles written, in Europe and the US. All right, get to know your study context even before you go about writing your problem statement and your proposal. Close observations of situations pertinent to the problem, okay? Again, in addition to getting to know people, you can also get to know the situation that you're studying by observing, observing behavior, observing people's interactions, etc. All right, so that firsthand experience is very useful, very important, especially if you're a qualitative research student, particularly, and you're going to study a problem in its context. You really should have some knowledge of the context, okay? Even just by reflecting on your own experience and your own practice. These are other ways of contributing to good problem statements. And of course, talking to practitioners. Nothing nothing replaces talking to experts. And experts, I don't mean experts like in the university, I mean experts that are dealing with this problem every day. They're in the thick of it every day. Talk to them, find out what is this problem like in the context of their work and their lives, etc. Okay, so all these are sources for identifying good problem statements for research. Okay, so now I want to just quickly sort of take you through this. I kind of came up with this. I don't know if it's any use. I don't know if it's really useful, but it's called the logic model, problem statement logic model. And you can do this for yourself. I think it could be quite helpful. So what you do is you start with a real life question. Again, a social problem, something that you've observed that you think you want to study. Okay. So for example, I took this problem of why is youth participation in sports declining? Okay. And we know globally from the literature, okay, some from reading, we know that youth participation in sports is on the decline, and it's pretty much a global phenomenon. Okay. And so researchers have begun to study this problem. Okay, so we start with a practical problem. We start with something that is a real felt need out there in the world. Okay, and then we begin our primary literature review. Okay, in addition to all the things I just mentioned, in addition to talking to people, talking to experts, talking to practitioners, we do our primary literature review. All right. So maybe from our primary literature review, and this is just an example. Okay, so don't take this as a real case, but maybe from our primary literature review, we arrive at, let's say, 4 main possibilities. Okay. From studies, with some evidence, right, that there are reasons why youth participation might be declining in sports. One may be infrastructure, okay, poor sporting infrastructure, lack of opportunities, okay. So for maybe, and this is true actually in the literature, we find that, in fact, sports participation for wealthier young people is actually on the rise, but for middle and lower socioeconomic groups, sports participation is declining. Okay, so that may have something to do with infrastructure, and that's what scholars have sort of hypothesized. Video games, e-sports, right? In other words, alternatives to sports. There's all these now alternatives to sports. Young people are not engaging so much anymore. Okay, or they'd rather do esports rather than real sports. Okay, that's another possibility that's been discussed in the literature. Qualified coaches. We don't have that many qualified coaches anymore. Even volunteers, back in the day, zaman dulu, okay, you had volunteers, parents, people in the community. They just volunteered to be coaches, right? To coach the bola club, the local bola club, or coach in the league or whatever. Now we see less of that. People aren't really sure why. So there's this lack of qualified coaching for sports. And then last but not least could be socioeconomic factors. Okay, so it could be, as I mentioned before, just because of being poor and having less access and opportunity. It's related to the first one, but it can also be its own possibility, also because of gender and these kind of things. Okay, so from our primary literature review, we've identified 4 main possibilities here. Now, when it comes to which one I want to focus on for my problem statement, I have to make some decisions because I'm in the field of youth development. My field of study is youth development. So I'm not going to be looking at probably video games so much. It's not really of interest to me. It's not, I could there are, of course, in youth studies, they do look at video games and stuff, but it's not really what my interest is in terms of field of study. It's not really where I see the issue being most widely discussed. Okay, because as you see what I just showed on the right, the most recent literature focuses on the relational dimension of youth sports participation. In other words, scholars are saying most recently that the best evidence shows that there's something about relationships, whether it's parents, coaches, peers, it's that sort of ecological environment that's influencing young people more than these other things. Okay, so based on that, I'm going to go with coaching. Okay, coaching to me looks like the one I'm going to focus on. Okay, and so from there, now I begin what I call a secondary literature review. Okay, I do a more in-depth literature review specifically of the literature related to coaching and other sort of relationship types of issues. And from this secondary literature review, I identified 3 more specific problems, okay, or potential issues, potential problems. Coaching as a developmental relationship, okay, meaning that young people they're not benefiting from coaching, other than they go, they play, and they compete, and they go home. But young people are not benefiting. They're not getting anything out of it in terms of their personal development. Okay, so coaching is not, the relationship with the coach it's not a fruitful relationship. Okay, and this is why young people are just losing interest in sports. Okay, the knowledge and the skills of the coach. As I mentioned, less qualified coaches means less knowledgeable and skilled coaches. Okay, so if coaches are not good at what they do, young people are not interested. Okay, third, maybe it's the gender of coaches. Maybe there's not enough good male coaches out there. Okay, or there's a mismatch between gender and players. Okay, something like that. Okay, so from my secondary literature review, now I've identified a more specific problem okay? Now, again, I go back to myself and I say, you know what? I have a theoretical bias. My theoretical bias is I come from a background in positive youth development, right? And in addition, I look at the contextual considerations of my problem, okay? So I look at, for example, I look at youth recreational sports in Malaysia. And I say, you know what? Based on my knowledge of the context and what I know from my years of experience and study in positive youth development, I really think coaching as a developmental relationship is the problem that I'm going to focus on. Okay, and so I've identified that. And so from there, I go back and I go back to my literature, and I find that few studies have explored how coaching as a developmental relationship influences young people's participation in sports. Okay, so I've narrowed down my problem. Now I'm ready for my problem statement. Okay, so you start off with a sort of question, a practical problem that you want to address, and you can sort of work your way down using both a primary and a secondary literature review, using your field of study, and within your field of study, what is your sort of theoretical perspective, theoretical bias, you might call it, okay? Combining that with the contextual considerations of where you're working or where you're, sort of observing, what's going on out there in the real world. Combine these together, and then you can identify a problem that way. Now, does that mean that we're ignoring all those other problems? Well, in some ways, yes, because you cannot study every dimension of every social issue in one study. It's impossible, okay? Especially for a PhD level study, okay? Maybe if we had a very big study with multiple researchers, from different backgrounds, etc., we could maybe try and tackle this issue head on as a whole, but for students, especially given the constraints and the scope of your study, you have to make choices and decisions in terms of how you're going to address your problem. All right. And so this is just the sort of exercise you can do. Now, the problem statement itself, once we sort of identify the problem statement itself is couched within a carefully constructed essay. Okay. So the problem statement should not be very long. Okay. For a thesis, at most 2 pages. All right. Maybe a little bit more. Okay. Maybe 3 pages. It depends. Okay. Because some PhDs, the scope of the study may be wider. So, but it should not be very long. Okay, it should not be very long because you don't want to duplicate what's in the introduction, and you don't want to duplicate what's in the literature review. Okay, that's really important. Okay, but it is a constructed essay. It has a funnel shape. You start off with a general covering, a general discussion of the literature, and you work your way down to a sort of specific, the specific problem that you're going to discuss in its context. And a lot of students, they make the mistake where they start off, they do a pyramid or a triangle, right? So they start off talking about the specific context, and then they try to get more general as they go. Okay, it tends to work better if you start with a funnel shape. Talk about the literature in general, where is the state of the field, and then work your way down to Malaysia, to a specific organization, etc. Okay, so you don't want to start off talking about your study context, because studying, the education ministry in Malaysia. Okay, that's your study context, but that's not the issue that you're really studying. You're studying a bigger issue. From the perspective of the field, you're looking at education policy making. For example, some sort of topic related to educational policy making, and you're going to study within the context of the education ministry in Malaysia. But that is just the study context. The issue itself is the bigger issue that you're going to make your contribution to the field. That's where you want to start, okay? And the problem statement explains the rationale for engaging in the research, okay? Again, it's the argument. You have to make that argument. Why is this research being conducted? Problem statement should be comprehensive, but not boring, okay? Literally, it should not be boring. It should be interesting. Keep the reader interested. You should be judicious in your selection of data and use that which most pointedly tells the story. So this is what I meant by don't duplicate the literature review. The problem statement is essentially it's a synthesis of the literature review. It identifies the core issue that you've sort of gleaned from your literature review, and it pastes it right there in a very short and concise manner, okay? Which is why you cannot do a good problem statement unless you've done a thorough literature review, and I like to use the word mastery. I mean, if you're studying a topic, like PhD, you're studying the same topic for like 3 or 4 years. If you don't have a mastery of your literature in that topic, I don't think you're really ready for PhD, honestly. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of our students are really reaching that point in their PhD journeys nowadays. Okay, because 3 to 4 years should be plenty of time for you to master the literature related to the topic that you're studying. If not, you're just not reading enough, or you're just not understanding what you're reading. Okay, and those are both problems that you need to address. Okay. So the problem statement, if you want to break it down into segments, it has 4 main parts. Okay. And I take this from Sharon Marion, Professor Sharon Marion, who's a well-known qualitative researcher, a great scholar in qualitative research. And when she teaches on problem statements, she likes to use this taxonomy of context, significance, gap, and purpose. I find it useful as well. Okay, it's not the only way you can segment or organize a structure of problem statement. There's other ways, but I think this one works pretty well. So I'm just going to use this one. Okay, so you start with the context, which is facts or details about the problem, the issue, from the literature and prior research. Okay, again, you start off with that synthesized literature review. I mean, literally, you're going to just glean the most important issues from the literature with supporting references, okay, if possible. You won't always find supporting references, and that's because those references will come later in chapter 2, right? But it does help usually to have references as well in the problem statement. So this helps the reader to understand the dimensions of the problem, okay? And again, you are doing a PhD is a knowledge generating type of study. It's not action research. I mean, you can do a PhD in action research, but the first and foremost contribution of a PhD must be to new knowledge. Okay, it must be. It's intellectual research. It's knowledge-based research. Okay, so think about what body of knowledge is my study going to be contributing to first, right? Before you start thinking about the practical contributions. Okay, because of course there should also be practical contributions as well, right? However, the first priority is to new knowledge. So you want to first state what body of knowledge is this problem going to be in reference to, okay? And what body of knowledge am I going to be contributing to, okay? And then there's the significance. Okay, so you've sort of outlined this problem. Why is this a problem? Okay, again, the significance of the study. Make an argument. This is a problem because without this knowledge, without understanding this aspect of the problem, we don't know why young people are skipping school, right? Or all of our efforts to stop students from skipping school are going to go to naught, okay, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to come up with a clear significance of the problem. Now, that's not the same as the significance of the study section in your chapter 1. It's a different significance. This is specifically the significance of the problem. Okay, the organization is bleeding money. Okay, the organization is spending 2 million ringgit a year on training, yet we don't even know whether this training is working. That's a problem. Okay, that's a big problem. All right. So who's affected by the problem and who cares about the problem? Okay, so that's significance. What is the knowledge problem essentially? Why is it a problem? Okay. And then the gap. Okay. So the gap in knowledge between what we know and what we don't know. All right. So we present past studies have discussed A, B, and C. Past studies have covered A, B, and C. In past studies, researchers have focused on A, B, and C. However, right? And the gap statement will almost always have a word like however, right? Blah, 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 blah. However, what we still don't know, or what is still perplexing to researchers is et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so usually the gap statement will have that kind of, I don't even know what you call that in English grammar, the however kind of word, all right? Between what we know so far, what has been studied, what have researchers looked at, right? And yet what still is needed to be understood, okay? And often the best place to get these kinds of gaps are in either articles or previous theses where they make recommendations for future research, okay? And you can even reference those, especially if it's everybody loves systematic literature reviews nowadays, right? Well, the best way to make use of a systematic literature review is to go to the recommendation section of the systematic literature review. These people have done a great service for us. They have reviewed all this literature and they've decided what are the most pressing findings, as well as what still needs to be done in that area. So if we go to the recommendations section of the systematic literature review, we'll get some good ideas on what research to follow up with, okay? So if you can cite those reviews in your, especially in your gap statement, in your literature review, it's fantastic. Several recent reviews of the literature have established that more work needs to be done in this area. Okay, bam, you just come out with it straight away. It's clear cut. First of all, they've done all that research, so you don't have to cite 16,000 studies. Okay, and if you're in an area or a topic where there has been a considerable amount of research done, it's even better because there's usually a lot of reviews that have been done as well. And then following the gap, after you've established the gap, this is what we don't know. Therefore, the purpose of this study is, okay? So you need to finish your problem statement with the purpose statement, okay? So the purpose of this study is to blah, 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 blah. In other words, address that gap that we just mentioned, okay? And how you're gonna do it very briefly can also be included in there. Okay, so let's get to some examples. I don't hear any questions so far, so I'm just going to continue. And if I don't hear you, I'm just going to continue and I'm going to keep talking. Okay, so if you want to stop me, please feel free.
Hello, Prof. I have a question.
Okay, I knew there was going to be a question.
Prof, Mariam here.
Oh, hi, Mariam.
Yeah, I have a question about the purpose of the study. Do we have to put it inside the problem statement, or we make it in a different section? Because normally if we read if I refer to the other thesis, PhD thesis, they will make it in a different section.
No.
The purpose of study alone.
It doesn't matter as long as it's there. And it should, by right, it should come after the gap though, because it's logical, right? You're identifying what the gap is, what we don't know. Okay, and then therefore, because we don't know this, the purpose of this study is to directly address that gap. So there should be a nice, consistent, logical flow to that statement or to that paragraph. You know what I mean? So I like it in the problem statement. You don't have to put in the problem statement. You can have, the next section can be the purpose of the study, and then you directly indicate what the purpose is. That's fine. That's just structure. That's just structure. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, sure. Anyone else? Any other questions before I move on? Because now we're going to talk. Now we're just going to look at examples, okay, of what I've just shown you. No. Okay. I will continue. Okay. So here's one, and you may be pretty shocked to see how short these problem statements are. Yes, these are all thesis problem statements. All right. Again, in UPM, we've been sort of, unfortunately in UPM, actually, I think we do a lot of, we tend to follow the quantity over quality theorem. It's not a theorem, it's a principle, I guess. But like when I was doing my PhD in UPM, I had my PhD had 8 chapters, I think, which is not allowed anymore. 8 or 9 chapters, I think. And it was about 400 some pages. In those days, they really liked dense, thick, heavy theses. So like the more you wrote, the better. Nowadays, we're not like that anymore. We have limitations. SGS puts word limits on us and stuff like that, or page limits. But we still tend to prefer students to write more than less, okay? And oftentimes, I think one of the problems with problem statements, at least from my experience, is they are often redundant, like I mentioned before, with the introduction as well as the literature review, okay? And what you're gonna see in these examples I'm gonna show you is very concise problem statements, right? Now, can you do problem statements this concise in UPM? You can if you do a very good, thorough introduction and you address the issues in the problem statement very thoroughly and clearly in the literature review, okay? Because there's no need, there's no reason why you have to put the same thing in the problem statement as you put in literature review. It's redundant, it's a waste of space. And it's actually confusing as well to the reader, okay? So don't make yours and everyone else's lives difficult have a very clear idea what a problem statement is, and you can make them short. All right. So I'm going to read this because it's short and it's good to sort of highlight these 4 dimensions I just showed you. Okay, the structure. So this is a study called the role of self-directed learning. Growing numbers of adults are placing increasing demands on medical services systems, and subsequently will affect the future direction of healthcare policy. In response to the increasing numbers, costs, and healthcare needs of older adults, the medical establishment has changed patient care policies. For example, managed care provider reimbursement policies have created incentives to move patients quickly through the healthcare system and have pressured physicians to limit office time for dialogue and health education. In response to these changes, health educators have been promoting an active role for patients in their own healthcare. Okay. The importance of understanding factors contributing to health maintenance is especially relevant for older adults, as it is this segment of the population who are most at risk. Those older adults who have taken control of their health are self-directing their own learning. However, little is known about how adults are using self-directed learning to gain access to health information and how this information is affecting their health care. Okay. Then the purpose of the study was to understand the role of self-directed learning in older adults' healthcare. The research questions that guide the study are as follows: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Very brief, very short. There's not even a lot of references there. Okay. Now, context. Now, they give a sort of context of the problem. Talking about the growing number of adults who are using medical services on their own. Okay. How it's changing policy. And patient care policies have changed. This is based in the US, not in Malaysia. Okay, and they give examples. Okay, in response, now that's just the general sort of context, the background of the problem, what's happened. Okay, and then the significance. In response to these changes, health educators have been promoting an active role for their patients in their own healthcare. Okay, so because of what's happening in the context, it is affecting health education, right? Which means that people have to take control of their own healthcare. Okay, and this is especially true for older adults. They're the ones who are most at risk, right? Because it may be much harder for them to take control of their own healthcare. They rely more on doctors, etc. All right. So, however, despite these changes going on, despite these changes in the industry, little is known about how older adults are using self-directed learning to gain access to health information. Okay, so the gap there is quite clear. All right, so this is the first example. Okay, context, significance, gap, purpose. Context is not context of the local setting. We usually call context the sort of local setting context. Here, context is the sort of context of the field. Okay, of the issue you're studying in the field. Okay, the sort of broader context of the issue. All right, and the related literature to it. Okay, let's look at some others. All right, here's another one. Over the years, sorry, let me move this. Over the years, research on teaching, together with the accumulation of practitioner wisdom, have provided teachers with a large array of options for organizing and delivering instruction. These include direct instruction, jurisprudential inquiry, cooperative learning, etc., etc., etc. Okay, some have been demonstrated to be in the hands of a competent practitioner highly effective, while others are minimally effective, even detrimental. Now, that essentially, that context there is really a summary of the literature, okay, on instruction, okay, on how teachers teach, basically. Okay, that's basically a summary of the literature. That's why it's called context. Okay. Now we get to the significance. However, in spite of this vast array of possibilities for more effectively organizing and delivering instruction available to teachers, the dominant mode of instruction continues to be lecture, demonstration, discussion. Okay. So there's significance there. So despite all these possibilities, teachers still prefer the same old lecture, demonstration, and discussion. Okay. All right. So what is the gap? There are a number of plausible explanations for the incongruity between what is known to be effective and the practices and actually used by teachers. Okay. These include poor preparation and training, the failure to adequately disseminate new knowledge on teaching, or the ideas that teachers selectively choose from among alternatives based on their evaluation of what might work, the level of effort involved, or what the culture of their schools will tolerate. In other words, the research has shown that there's evidence that all of these could be a possibility. All right. And what's nice about that, when it's proposed like that, what it means is that we're still not sure. Okay. There's a number of plausible explanations. In other words, they could have said, so-and-so in their review, determined that there are a number of plausible explanations and it is still unclear, something like that. That would have also been an alternative use of language there to show that, well, the research is not settled. In other words, there's all this different evidence showing different things, okay? Then the purpose. The most interesting and potentially insightful explanation of why teachers fail to utilize a variety of strategies that might achieve better results may lie in a better understanding of the forces at work in the school culture that encourage or discourage innovation. Okay, so despite all these different possibilities, now they're saying that based on the evidence that they've come across, it might be an issue of school culture. Okay, therefore, the purpose of the study is to blah, blah, blah. Okay? So it's not written in a way that is that explicit in terms of this is the gap, this is the significance of the study of the problem. Okay, but clearly we can see they are proposing, or they are mentioning or listing the same four kind of categories, or the same four elements, sorry, to the problem statement, okay? Here's another one. All right, and this is from a study on racial diversity on complex thinking in college. Previous research has found that racially diverse educational environments are associated with positive intellectual and social outcomes for college students. Okay, now the power of that sentence is that, again, it is like a summary of the body of knowledge, okay, in that area. And this is what you do in a problem statement, is that you summarize the literature and you make these very strong sort of declarative claims or statements about what scholars have found. What is the literature saying? Okay, so previous research has found, okay, racial diversity in the student body is linked to the likelihood that a student will interact with someone of a different race or ethnicity and engage in discussions of racial or ethnic issues. Okay, and so that's just an elaboration on the research, on the context. Okay, now frequent interaction across racial lines and discussion of racial and ethnic issues positively predicts student retention, intellectual and social self-concept, and overall satisfaction with college. The existing evidence, however, is based largely on quasi-experimental or correlational designs using self-report data. No study to date has randomly assigned students to conditions of racial diversity and directly examined cognitive outcomes, okay? So this problem statement does not have a purpose. So Miriam, based on your question just now, yes, you do not need to have the purpose statement in the problem statement. This one does not either, okay? So it's kind of optional whether you want to include it or not, all right? Okay, so here we can see context. They basically reviewed literature for us in a couple sentences, okay? So you basically summarized the whole body of knowledge in just a few sentences, okay? That's a good problem statement, where I can just read a few sentences and get a very strong sense of what is in the literature, all right? Now, to do that, you have to review a lot of literature and you have to make a determination. You have to draw a conclusion about that literature, okay, on your own. Now, the significance here is that they're showing that this issue is related to certain outcomes among students, okay? So frequent interaction across racial lines, discussion of racial ethnic issues positively predicts student retention, intellectual and social self-concept, and overall satisfaction with college. In other words, they're showing why it's important. It's important because it leads to these good outcomes, right? Overall satisfaction with college, right? Student retention. These are all good things, okay? So this interaction across racial lines leads to good things. That's significant. That means it's an important issue, okay? Now the gap is what kind of gap? Who can tell me what kind of gap is mentioned here?
It's a knowledge gap, maybe.
Methodological gap.
Yeah, well, it's a knowledge gap for sure. But what type of knowledge gap? I think somebody just said it. Could you just repeat that?
Gap.
Methodological gap. Yeah. So they're highlighting here the gap in methodology, right? Now, we can assume from this that there's been a lot of studies. There's been a lot of research done, but as they say, mostly based on correlational or correlational or quasi-experimental designs only. No no experimental research, okay, with random design, all right? So they are highlighting a methodological gap. And that can also be the basis for your study. It can also be a methodological gap, right? Partly the reason why a lot of students like to do instrument development studies. Why are we developing a new measure or a new instrument, you know, to study something quantitatively? Because there's a methodological gap. This thing, whatever it is important, but we don't have the tool to measure it. Therefore, we need a study to develop the tool to measure it. You just have to show why this thing is important, and to show that there's at the current state of affairs, we don't have the appropriate tool for it. And then you can justify why you want to do a measurement development study. Okay, one more here. This is called off the tenure track, understanding the effects of contingent faculty appointments. Okay, a contingent faculty appointment means like a part-time lecturer in Malaysia. Okay, why are universities hiring so many part-time lecturers? Basically, is what this study is about. Higher education researchers have become increasingly concerned with the changing mix of tenure track and non-tenure track faculty appointments. Between 1975 and 1995, the number of part-time faculty increased by 103%, and the number of full-time tenure ineligible faculty by 93%. Meanwhile, the number of probationary tenure track faculty decreased by 12%. Okay, that is a good, they're sort of setting the table, showing us the layout. What is the situation now? Okay, this is the situation, okay? The most recent estimates suggest that more than half of all instructional staff are contingent faculty and that they work in tenure ineligible positions, either in a part-time or full-time capacity, okay? So they're summing it up and they're showing why that's significant, right? Because if you're in a university, you want to be taught by somebody who is not just there for a few weeks or a few months, you know, someone that's an established scholar, not some part-time person that just comes to teach a few courses and then goes away, and you know they may not be very expert in their field, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why this is important. Okay, that's essentially what they're saying here. While there are various reasons for the increases in the number of contingent appointments, few scholars have examined the consequences of employing large numbers of tenure ineligible faculty. Okay, so once again, context, significance, gap. Now here, the gap statement here is very interesting because, as I showed you before in that logic model, in any problem, especially in a social problems are very complicated, very complex, right? Human beings are complex. We're not like plants and animals, you know. If crops don't grow, we can say they're not getting enough water, okay? And then we can try and come up with ways to, you know, irrigate crops, okay? Human beings are much more complex, right? Which is something that the physical scientists don't really know about us. They can't seem to figure out why our research isn't as straightforward and simple as theirs. Not that there's a simple, I mean simplistic in terms of straightforward. Ours tends to be very complex. So there are many ways of tackling social problems, right? There are many ways of studying them. So what they're saying here is that while there are various reasons for the increases in the number of contingent appointments, it may be budgets, it may be government funding cuts, it may be changes in policies at individual universities, it may be number of student, you know, the decrease in student enrollment. There may be so many reasons. This researcher, however, has chosen to examine the consequences of employing large numbers of tenure ineligible faculty. In other words, they've decided to look at it from this perspective only, okay? So you also have to make that kind of decision in your problem statement. You have to be very clear how you're planning on tackling this issue. You're not going to tackle every dimension of the problem. You cannot, okay? But you want to, again, and it could be based on your own theoretical bias, what you're trained in, your field of study, okay? What you see as the most pressing issue in the literature, right? That relates to your field of study, you know, and that's usually the best way to go. So either way, though, you have to make a decision about your, in your problem statement about how you're going to address this problem that you're studying, okay? Because you cannot possibly tackle the whole thing. Okay, so that, of course, that a lot of students are very uncomfortable with that. I have to make a decision that I'm going to study it from even this theoretical perspective as opposed to that theoretical perspective, right? And why? There must be a why there. You have to explain that. Okay, so just these are some examples. There's many more out there, of course. Now, problem statements, I only have 10 minutes. Problem statements should possess the following attributes: clarity and precision, all right? A well-written statement does not make sweeping generalizations and irresponsible pronouncements. It also does include unspecific determinants like very or giant. Okay, so don't use words like very and giant or big or thing. These kinds of words in your problem statement. This is a very big problem. Okay, don't say that. This is a significant problem. Scholars have pointed to the seriousness of this problem. Scholars have pointed to, the fact that this problem has caused much, concern among policymakers or something like that. Okay, try to avoid those types of those types of words. Demonstrate a researchable topic or issue. All right, demonstrate a researchable topic or issue. Feasibility of conducting a study is based on access to information that can be effectively acquired, gathered, interpreted, synthesized, and understood. So your topic must be feasible. The issue must be. Don't choose a topic that you cannot access the data for, right? Or it's too big, like I mentioned before. Don't be afraid. I mean, really, don't be afraid of your topic being too specific. I honestly cannot think of a PhD student who came to me with a topic that was too specific to study. I cannot, in my however many years that I've been doing this, I cannot remember. Many students come and they want to study the sky and the stars and the moon and everything underneath. But I've yet to come across a student that says, this topic is too specific for your PhD. I've yet to have that problem. Maybe some of my colleagues have, okay? But the problem is usually that students want to study everything and they can't identify what that is, the specific problem that they want to study, okay? So make sure your topic is researchable, it's feasible, all right? And you have access to it, right? Don't study something that you cannot get access to. Identification of what would be studied while avoiding the use of value-laden words and terms, okay? Okay, so avoid value-laden words and terms as much as possible, okay? We see this in a lot of students that want to study things that are sort of very meaningful to them. They often place a lot of value statements on those things. Like I did my PhD study on something related to Islamic religiosity because it was an issue that was very close to my heart at that time. So I had to really divorce myself from myself as a researcher and myself as someone that's experiencing that phenomenon. Okay, so when you wear a research hat, you need to understand that you are trying to study that phenomenon objectively, okay? Objectively, all right? So try to avoid value-laden words that would indicate that you are, you have personal biases related to that topic, in other words. Identification of an overarching question or small set of questions accompanied by key factors or variables, okay? It's good to have an overarching question. The main question of this study that we tried to address is this, right? Have a big question, right? And then have smaller questions that you're going to try to address through the different techniques that you use in terms of data analysis and so forth. But have a big question. What is the big question that I want to answer in this study? If nothing else, it'll help you to get clarity about your study, okay? What's the big question? I have a good mentor, colleague from overseas, and he always frames our studies that way. It's never very academic. It's just what are we trying to learn from this study? What's the big question we're asking? Okay, and then from there, once you get that, then you can break it down into smaller, more specific questions. But if you don't know the big question, forget about the small question because they're not going to be really tied together. Okay, they're going to be sort of all over the place. Identification of key concepts and terms. Don't forget to define clearly the key concepts and terms you're using in your study. Okay, very important. There's many different definitions for the terms we use in social sciences. So be clear about your concepts and terms. Please be clear about the articulation of the study's boundaries. Okay, the scope of the study needs to be clear. What are you studying and what are you not studying? Limitations and delimitations, that kind of thing. Okay, some generalizability in regards to applicability and bringing results to general use. Okay, so again, the practical application of your findings. How can these findings be used in a practical way? All right, in a practical translational type of manner. Conveyance of the study's importance, benefits, and justification. Okay. So regardless of the type of research, it's important to demonstrate that the research is not trivial. Okay. Again, significance of the problem. Okay. The problem that you're studying should have significance in some way to somebody. Right. That needs to be clear. Don't use unnecessary jargon or overly complex sentences. Okay. I know some people, they like to use very long, complicated sentences. Okay. Try to write concisely, be straight to the point as much as possible. Don't use excessive words, like jargony words that people don't understand what they mean, don't know what they mean. Okay. Be precise. Academic writing is all about precision, okay, and clarity. So focus on that in your problem statements. Some of the common problems with problem statements, okay? Failure to establish the existence of a problem. Okay, so you jump right into purpose without explaining the problem. You talk about questions, you don't explain the problem. Okay. The inventory that you're going to develop, the instrument that you're going to develop will be used to do something, but you haven't identified why you're developing the instrument. What's the problem in relation to developing that instrument? Statement of a condition. The number one problem in the country today is inflation. All right. That's a condition. That's not a problem. Why is that a problem? That's okay. So it's too generic. You haven't really focused in on the research problem that you're going to study. Okay. It's okay to talk about that in the context of the problem statement. You start off with that, and then you get more specific as you go. And that's the idea of the pyramid or the inverted triangle, right? You start off general. So you can start off with a statement like the number one problem in the country is inflation. Okay, but then you need to boil that down into something that's researchable, that's narrower and researchable. Okay. Don't leave it at that. That's not enough of a problem. It's too generic. Okay. All right. So parochialism, the problem is too personal, it's too institutional, it's too disparate. So this is the overly narrow problem. Okay. And again, I haven't seen too many of these. Some students, they like to make their problem statements very personal. It's usually not a good idea to talk about personal issues or the individual in the problem statement, unless you're doing something like an autoethnographic study or a certain type of research design that really focuses in on the researcher. In that case, it's acceptable. But in most studies, it's not really appropriate to talk about oneself in the problem statement. Okay, the lick the world statement, again, too broad. You're trying to take on too much. Try to avoid that. And the solution that makes no difference. Okay, so it has no real the solution really has no application to anything in the real world, or a justification without a problem. Okay, so a lot of these, there's just no clear problem that's being stated. Do not state, this is called circular reasoning. Do not state that the research problem is simply the absence of the thing you're suggesting. So for example, if you propose the following, the problem in this community is that there is no hospital. Okay, so this leads to a research problem where the need is for a hospital. The objective is to create a hospital. The method is to plan for building a hospital. And the evaluation is to measure if there is a hospital or not. Okay. So in other words, don't provide the solution as the problem. And I mentioned this earlier in the talk, right? Problem statement is a problem, it's not a solution. The reason you're doing the research is to come up with solutions to problems, not to present a problem. If you know the problem, if you know the solution to the problem, you don't need to do a study. There's no need to do research. You know the solution. Why are you doing a study? Okay. So if you think if you're coming at your research from that perspective, like, oh, I know what the issue is, I know what the solution is, don't do research, at least on that issue. Okay, because you can't do a study on that issue. Because either you know the answer to the problem, what the solution is, or you think you do, and you have these grand assumptions that are going to really color your research and make it difficult. Okay, so I tried to finish in 1 hour, and I did it. I apologize. I apologize for going so fast. Any questions, concerns, anything you need me to clarify? Please.
Hi, Assalamualaikum, Prof.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate if how am I going to incorporate novelty in terms of the research problem? Because I'm talking about in the perspective of a PhD study.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, novelty is one of the criteria of a PhD study. There should be some element of novelty, right? So do you understand, what is your understanding of what novelty means? What does novelty mean to you?
For me, it's something that is uniquely contributing to the body of knowledge in terms of,
Yeah,
for example, maybe some extension of the current theory, or maybe combination
yeah,
of multiple models, something like this. Is it a valid
exactly.
assumption? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And novelty is not only on theory, novelty can be in terms of context of study. So you want to extend a particular theory by testing it in a new context, a new setting. That's also considered novelty. All right, because by doing that, you may find a new construct, a new variable, something that's going to add a new dimension to that theory. Okay, so I had a colleague when I was in my PhD, a friend of mine. He did a grounded theory study on organizational learning in the aviation industry, and he based it on a particular model, right? So then he did his research, but because he was doing his research in a new context, the aviation industry, in an Asian country, an Asian setting, he was able to come up with just one new variable that he felt should have been in that model. So his finding was essentially a new variable to an existing model. Okay. And he made a strong case for that through his research. Okay. So that's the novelty. That's the novel contribution from his study. It's just one new variable.
All right, understood. Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah. Of course, it's a very good question. It's also a hard question to answer because novelty can be in so many different forms. Like just now I showed you on novelty in terms of method, right? Doing, sort of not replicating a study, but looking at an issue that's been studied before, but studying it differently, right? With a new design, research design. That's also novelty. Okay, so anything else? Let's see. Are there any more questions anyone want to ask? I see some chat in the chat box. There's some stuff here. Yes, we'll share. I think it's going to be shared on, yeah, it's going to be shared. Okay. Oh, no questions here. Oh, Prof, where do we need to indicate the primary literature review shared in the logic model? Well, I wouldn't call it, yeah, the primary, secondary literature review thing is just my own way of sort of thinking about it. I wouldn't call it a primary or a secondary literature review. I would just call it literature review, But the idea there is that when you're embarking on a new research topic, you do sort of have to do a review of the literature just to sort of get a sense of where the field is at. What are the main issues related to this particular problem? How are researchers thinking about these issues in sort of general ways first? They're looking at it from a relational perspective, looking at it from a systems perspective. Policy is a big issue. Okay, so you've identified those sort of core areas or core, bodies of knowledge. Okay, I don't know how else to say it, and then once you've decided on which one or maybe which two you want to really delve into, then you have to do, of course, a more elaborate, a more specific literature review. A more granular literature review where you're looking at all the specific studies within that sort of sub body of knowledge. Okay, so to me, that's just the way I think of it. Primary and secondary, it's not something that's formal. There's no such thing as formally as a primary and secondary literature review. Okay, but it just helps me think about it in a systematic way.
Hi, Prof.
Okay, any other question?
I have a question. I have a question.
Sure.
You have just mentioned there are 4 parts of the problem statement, and you mentioned there should be a final shape from general to specific. So, is there any relationship between the 4 parts and the final shape? From general to specific when they do a problem statement?
From the 4, I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question. Is there a relationship between the 4 parts of the problem statement And what else?
And the problem statement should be a final shape from general to specific.
Yeah, it should be, as you can see in the examples I showed. Those probably aren't really good examples for that, because those are very short problem statements. But if you have a longer problem statement, will be usually, even in the gap part. You talk about, you'll mention the problem as it occurs in the local setting. So for example, you talk about the general literature, and then you talk about, well, in the Malaysian educational context, right? And then you talk about the problem as it is being manifested, as it's happening in the local context that you want to study. Okay, so that's what I mean by going from general to specific. And then from there, you can identify specifically the problem that you are trying to address in your study. Okay, so I don't know if I answered your question, but that was what I understood.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
Okay. I apologize if I didn't answer the question. Okay, someone else asked, can we have just one main gap, or do we need to show gaps in theory, practice, and research? For a PhD, it's good to have all. I mean, gap in theory is a tricky one, because of course the theory is knowledge. So typically gap in research refers to the empirical research. In other words, previous studies that have been done on that topic. You're not always going to have a clear theoretical gap per se. So oftentimes people will frame their theoretical gap as a gap in empirical research. In other words, we just lack research studies on this particular topic in this area or whatever. But that, if you can relate that to the theory that you're using, of course it's beneficial. So there's the use of this word theory is very tricky, because a lot of people have different notions of what it means. Even among your supervisors, other academics, my colleagues, there are some that say that theory means formal theory, like big, formal, grand theory. Every study must be based on one of these grand theories. Others will say no, theory means more or less any kind of theoretical model or theoretical basis for a study. Even if it's a small conceptual model, that's also theoretical, and that can also be used as this sort of theoretical framework for your study. So people have different schools of thought and notions about theory and its role in research. Okay, so it often depends on who you have as a supervisor and their sort of school of thought on this. Okay, but yeah, there should be a theoretical contribution to the study. Yes, sure, but in terms of a gap, like, oh, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is missing Maslow's hierarchy of needs is missing a big, section or something. And no, you're not going to make a contribution to Maslow's hierarchy of needs with your small little PhD study. Okay, you may find that the way that Maslow's theory applies in your study might be a little bit different than in other studies, but no, you're not going to make a major contribution to Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory in that sense. Okay, so again, theoretical contribution can be, maybe to you and I, maybe something minor, but it's actually quite important, even if it's just application in a new context, in a new setting. Sorry. Another one here. How many pages of problem statement section optimally written in the PhD thesis? The length question. Everybody wants to know how long. Just tell me how many pages I have to write. Well, it's not that simple. There really is no specific amount. You can write a good problem statement in a page. You can write a good problem statement in 2 pages. I personally don't like students going beyond 2 or 3 pages for a problem statement. I think if your problem statement is too long, it often means that you don't have a very clear problem statement. Okay, because a problem statement really should be pretty concise. It should be, like I said, you should have been able to really synthesize the literature, really pulled out the key points, okay, the key issues, and yeah, it just doesn't need to be very long. If it is, I have a feeling that you're probably covering too much. Okay. NJ asked, please enlighten us about theoretical gap. I don't think I can enlighten you. about a theoretical gap. It's kind of a hard topic to enlighten people on. I don't even know what that means, NJ. What do you mean by enlighten us about theoretical gap?
Can you listen to my voice?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I took Prof. Maimunah Krauss before back in 2017, and she mentioned, and she provided us note on theoretical gap. But up until today, I'm not clear about theoretical gap. Is it about theory that has not much been employed in research, or there's something lacking in the theory that needed to be studied?
Yeah, possibly the latter. It can also be that it hasn't been, theory hasn't been, some theories are completely conceptual. They haven't been tested, right? So some theories just have not been empirically tested. That's a gap. That's a big gap, right? So, if you're using, a sort of a new theory that has just received conceptual attention and it hasn't actually been applied yet in terms of empirical study, that's a major gap. That's simple. Simple. Other theories, they haven't been applied in different contexts. They haven't been used in, say outside of the U.S. or something like that. And by doing that, of course, you're gonna learn a lot about that theory, how universal that theory really is. And that's what people want to know. Like for theorists, those people that formulate theories, that's what they want. They want people to use their theories, apply them in different settings, apply them in different contexts, in different situations, and build on them, because a theory is, it's just an explanation of a phenomenon. So it's always evolving. And that's how it evolves. It evolves when people use it and apply it in different situations. Okay. So there's a lot of ways to sort of talk about a theoretical gap, but a lot of it has to do with that, applying it in different situations, and then learning what works and what doesn't work in the theory in those different situations. Okay, somebody quoted me as saying problem statement is a statement, not an essay. Krauss 2020. I'm not sure what that means. For a theoretical gap, maybe we can combine theory A and C since theory A and B has been explored. That's not a gap. Combining theories is not a gap. A lot of students have this idea that, I have to make this really complicated, theoretical framework, and I have to sort of mesh 5 theories together to come up with a theoretical gap. No, that's just going to give you a lot of headaches, actually. If you need 2 theories to explain a phenomenon, then you can combine theories in your theoretical framework, no problem. If you really feel that you need 2 different theories to explain a phenomenon, that's fine. But that in and of itself is not a theoretical gap, okay? Since A and B has been explored, okay, well, what did they find in A and B? Did it work? What are the findings? What were the yeah, so I mean, it could be, yeah, it could be. If A and B have been explored heavily and now you're bringing in a new theory along with theory A, yeah, that could be. It's not necessarily a gap though. It's just the way you're formulating your study. I'm not sure how that's a gap. Anyway, Prof, is there any difference between problem statement for quantitative and qualitative research? No, only that you're going to conclude from your problem statement that you need to do a qualitative study. So you're going from your synthesis and review of the literature, you have determined that, and you have deduced that. Sorry, you have deduced that the problem is one of methodology. In other words, that there isn't enough qualitative research on that topic for some reason. There's some things we don't know that can only be answered qualitatively, and you've concluded that from your literature review, and that's why your problem statement is drawing that conclusion. Again, the conclusion is that a qualitative study needs to be done. All right. In fact, I'm writing a proposal now for a study, and in the systematic review, they conclude very clearly that the vast majority of research has been done qualitatively, and there have been very few quantitative studies on this topic. So I'm going to pick up on that as part of my study purpose. Okay. Prof, do you think data, sorry, do you think that a gap is actually a data gap? Because we can think of problems, we may not be able to find suitable data to prove it. Yeah, of course. Well, data is evidence. You know, you need evidence that there's a problem out there, right? So evidence has to come from somewhere. So yeah, data is evidence, right? Always think of it as evidence. Whatever data is out there, whatever studies are out there, this is the evidence that there's a problem. What's wrong with this evidence? Is it incomplete? Does it have limitations, shortcomings? Is it insufficient? Are there methodological problems with the evidence? You know, that's the best way to think of it. So yeah, data is definitely, it could be a shortage of data. Okay, that's all I see in the chat box. Anything else before we adjourn? Well, thank you all for attending. I hope it was useful. It was, of course, brief, and this is a topic that you know, writing a good problem statement, it takes time. So don't be impatient with yourselves. Try to be patient. Again, you have to read. You need to discuss as well. You know, you need to discuss the literature you're reading. Okay, it's not enough just to read it and think that you can just come up with it. You need to really discuss it with people, if not your supervisor, your supervisory committee, whatever, colleagues, friends, whatever. You know, discuss it, and work through it. Okay, it's work. Okay, so alhamdulillah, thank you so much, everyone. And I think, Mr. Haikal will, yeah, there's Haikal. Yes, Mr. Haikal.
Some student request for your slides.
Sure.
Could you share to our chat room?
Yep, I can.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, I'm uploaded. All right, it's uploaded. Oh no, I sent it to the wrong. Hold on a second. Sorry. I sent it to one person only. The unlucky person. Okay, it's there. Okay, kasih banyak semua. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
much. Hi, Adi.
Prof. Thank you, Prof.
See Adi. See Mariam.
Thank you, Prof.
Hi, thank you. See some of you guys. Okay, jumpa lagi. Enjoy your lunch.
You too.
Okay, bye. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.